Cartethyia is going to be the newest releasing character in version 2.4 of Wuthering Waves, and she's looking to be an HP scaling normal attack focused aero DPS that heavily benefits from using her Resonance Liberation to transform into an enhanced state. She might be one of the most hyped characters in the game currently, and you're probably wondering how strong she is and how she works, so let's get right into that. Starting with her normal attack, it's a 4-hit attack string dealing aero and wind erosion damage. Using the 4th hit in this attack string applies 2 layers of wind erosion and simultaneously will summon a divine sword. Unlike her normals, her heavy attack won't apply any wind erosion at all, and it will summon an alien sword instead of a divine one. This heavy attack is also considered as wind erosion damage as well. Her plunge attack will deal damage while consuming all swords, and then her dodge counter doesn't do anything special, but both of these abilities are also considered as wind erosion damage as well, which is nice. And her resonance skill will summon a human sword while also applying 2 layers of wind erosion, and the damage from the skill is considered as normal or wind erosion damage just like her other abilities. Now you might be wondering, what the hell do these swords do? Well, she can summon 3 different types of swords, being the divine, alien, and human sword, with only one of each of these swords being able to be summoned at a time. So you can't summon 3 divine swords or 3 human swords, you can only have one of each. Now what these swords do is they will enhance the damage and range of her plunge attack based on how many swords she consumes, at a max of 3, while also transforming each sword consumed into 3 different status effects depending on the sword that you actually consumed. The divine sword will become the divine rights effect, the alien sword will become the hetero poly effect, and the human sword will become the human rights effect. As for what these effects do, that will make more sense when we talk about her resonance liberation. Now what her resonance liberation does is, first of all, it will transform Cartethyia into her Forte form, and it will drop her HP to half while also making her enter the manifestation state, granting her 60% aero damage bonus lasting for 12 seconds. An important thing to note about this is it reduces her HP to half. If her HP is already lower than half, it cannot be reduced to half, so you will have no HP consumed in that case. When hitting an enemy in this Forte form, she'll gain determination points, and when at 120 points of determination, pressing the ultimate button again will let her use her second resonance liberation, dealing a large amount of aero damage while also clearing all wind erosion on the enemy and gaining a 20% damage increase to this ability for every wind erosion stat cleared, capped at 5, aka 100% damage bonus if you max it out. So you'd optimally want to get at least 5 wind erosion on the enemy so you can get the maximum damage out of this ability. And because this ability clears all wind erosion stacks on the enemy, you would optimally use it at the end of your rotation so it doesn't make you lose out on damage because the enemy no longer has stacks when you're attacking. Additionally, when using her second resonance liberation, it will heal 70% of Carthethia's max HP, which is nice, as using her first ult will reduce her HP to half, so it can help with your survivability. If you instead press ult again before having 120 points of determination, she'll instead transform back into the Cartethyia form, and if she's in that 12-second manifestation state after first ulting, you can transform back and forth freely with no energy cost required. This is really nice, not just for convenience sake, but it can be used to also help her rotations a bit, which I'll talk about later. When in this manifestation state, Flutter Release will also gain special abilities depending on which effect she gained from consuming swords in the Cartethyia form. If she has the human rights effect, her 4th normal attack will summon a force field, slowing enemies in range. If she has the divine rights effect, she'll amplify the wind erosion damage received by nearby enemies while also reducing the interval rate of wind erosion. And if she has the hetero poly effect, her resonance skill, 4th normal attack, and 3rd aerial attack will immediately calculate 1 wind erosion stack and then remove that stack after this calculation is over. So optimally, you would get all 3 of these effects by getting all 3 swords in the Cartethyia form via her 4th normal, skill, and heavy attack, and then you would transform these swords into the 3 aforementioned effects by using her enhanced plunge with all 3 swords. It's really easy to get all 3 swords, and they increase her plunge damage, so you should get them, but if you wanted to know the priority order in which swords are most important, I'd say that the divine sword you get from doing 4 normals is the most important, as it gives a wind erosion amp and also makes wind erosion decay slower, which will help you have more stacks of wind erosion more frequently, so it's just an overall bonus to your damage. The human sword you get from her skill doesn't really seem that important and is just mostly for quality of life, as it's only grouping that it gives, and grouping is nice, but if you don't need the grouping, you can skip it, which you honestly really don't in this game. Most of the fights in tower are just against a single boss where grouping won't really matter. And then the alien sword you get from your heavy attack seems to actually be not very good at all. Getting rid of wind erosion stacks doesn't do anything for Cartethyia specifically or any other character on her team besides making the DOT from erosion itself trigger more frequently, but the DOT damage is just such a small portion of damage that it doesn't end up changing much, and it just ends up being a net negative. It making you immediately calculate wind erosion means that wind erosion will be on the enemy for a smaller amount of time because you're getting rid of it, so in teams without a wind erosion applier like Ciaccona, you can have issues keeping up any wind erosion stacks, let alone 5 for the max increase for her second resonance liberation. So I'm not really sure what the point in this effect is besides it just making you want to pull Ciaccona more so she can have more comfortable rotations because you have wind erosion for longer. And unfortunately, Carthethia's intro skill will automatically give an alien sword, so you can't even avoid this effect by just not doing a heavy attack, which means in pretty much any rotation where you do Carthethia's intro skill, which you will do, not getting this hetero poly effect is pretty much just impossible. So this will just make maintaining high Wind Erosion stacks without Ciaccona a lot more annoying. Anyways, let's move on to her Forte Circuit and what it actually does. After using Carthethia's ultimate to transform into Flood Release, all her attacks and combos will be enhanced. Her 4-hit normal attack string in the Cartethyia form is now replaced with a 5-hit one, dealing more damage. Her jump will now cause an upward attack that can be chained into her mid-air heavies and normals. Her ground heavy attack can now be chained into a second heavy attack, dealing additional damage. Her dodge counter can now be chained into her 4th ground normals. Her skill now has enhanced grouping and can just be cast mid-air, while also allowing you to follow up with a second skill, dealing additional arrow damage considered as normal attack damage. All of these attacks have increased scalings from her base form, while also being able to gain the buffs from the manifestation state, so these attacks will just deal more damage than the attacks in the Cartethyia form, and the Flutteries form is how you should be spending the majority of your time on this character. Now, as you may have noticed, none of these attacks actually apply Wind Erosion, so this means that the only way to apply them via Cartethyia herself is in her base form. This may not seem like that big of a problem since you can apply 6 stacks in the Cartethyia form by doing her intro, her skill, and then her 4th basic 2 times, which is a rotation I've actually seen some gameplay of, and with proper setup it actually looks like this will be the easiest rotation to do, and this will let you get to the minimum 6 erosion stacks as long as you have Rover on the team, which lets her get the maximum damage bonus from her kit. However, because of the annoying ass hetero poly effect, which is pretty much unavoidable, when doing her normals or skills in her enhanced form, which she'll do because they are how you deal damage, she'll consume these erosion stacks, constantly making it harder to have 5 erosion stacks on the enemy, making her get less damage bonus on her ult and in general. This problem can be worked around by swapping between the Flutteries and Cartethyia forms, since again, as long as you don't have full determination, pressing ult will swap between them and there will be no cooldown as long as you're in the manifestation state, which you will be as long as you're actually using her ultimate. I'm not sure how practical this will be, but this should be a potential playstyle, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is how you end up having to play if you don't have Ciaccona to apply Wind Erosion for you. But of course, if you do have Ciaccona, she will fix this problem, and then you won't have to worry about shit. You can just go ham in the Flutteries form because you don't have a problem with Wind Erosion Application. However, not everyone will have her, so it's important to mention the problems that can arise from this. And even if you don't have her, as long as your erosion stacks don't go below 1, you'll at least be fulfilling the minimum erosion requirement for her echo set, which is the bare minimum, and if you're averaging roughly 3 erosion stacks, you'll still be getting half of the damage deepen buff, so it's not like you're missing out on completely everything if you don't have the full 6 stacks of erosion. It sucks that you'll miss out on damage because you have less erosion, but it's not the end of the world. If you don't want to play super optimally to maintain full stacks of erosion, you don't have to. And no, Aero Rover cannot fix this, as for some fucking reason they do not apply Aero Erosion without Ciaccona or Phoebe, since they can only transfer a status effect to Aero Erosion. They can't make Aero Erosion out of nothing, so you would need Ciaccona or Phoebe to apply Spectral Frazzle so Rover can then apply Aero Erosion. So sadly, Rover is not a band-aid for this problem. Something else that's pretty weird about the Flood Release form is that none of her attacks are considered as Wind Erosion damage either. So even though she herself buffs Wind Erosion damage, it won't actually buff her own damage at all, and it will only buff the Wind Erosion DOT ticks themselves, which is just pretty fucking useless. This also negatively affects her synergy with Ciaccona, since Ciaccona's outro is a 100% Wind Erosion amp, and it's just less impactful since it would only buff Carthethia's base form, since that's the only form that deals Wind Erosion damage. This is a pretty weird design choice to make her so clearly want Wind Erosion, but not actually benefit from some of her supports or even her own buffing, since she's not dealing that damage. For example, Zani, she deals Spectral Frazzle damage, and it makes sense because Phoebe buffs Spectral Frazzle damage. If Zani couldn't deal Spectral Frazzle damage, then what the fuck would be the point of Phoebe buffing Spectral Frazzle damage? You wouldn't use them together, besides for the fact that Phoebe can apply Spectral Frazzle, but Rover already could do that, so Phoebe wouldn't be as great of an option, which is pretty similar to how good Ciaccona is for Cartethyia. Her case is slightly better because Ciaccona does give some damage bonus from her base kit, and she can make very good use of the arrow set that buffs arrow damage for the entire team, but besides like 30-ish damage percent and erosion application, she's not doing anything else. Now, despite the fact that I think this is really weird, I do actually kind of like this. Because Ciaccona's synergy is a bit worse now with Cartethyia, since she doesn't buffer as much, this will make the gap in actual damage between a Cartethyia team with and without Ciaccona not as big as, for example, a Zani team with and without Phoebe, because again, Zani benefits from a 100% damage amp while Cartethyia does not. I'd say the major problem is that without Ciaccona, you have a lot lower erosion application, but like I said earlier, you could play around this, and if that playstyle is actually viable, it makes teams without Ciaccona actually pretty damn good. And more importantly, Carthethia's damage at a baseline is also really fucking good, so missing out on Ciaccona's 100% erosion amp plus Carthethia's own 50% amp in her kit won't actually make her perform terribly as a DPS. Even when she's not able to make use of these damage amps, from the calcs I've seen recently, her damage is still very close to Zani's, who I think is the current best DPS in the game. And this isn't just with Ciaccona specifically. Even in a Rover Shorekeeper team, Cartethyia is still a really good damage dealer and arguably top 3 DPS. However, take these calcs with a grain of salt, as these calcs were made still pretty early into the beta, and these results will vary depending on the player, as in Ciacconaless teams, it will be harder to maintain Aero Erosion stacks. Carthethia's rotations become a bit more complicated, so if you're not able to actually do these rotations, then her damage will end up worse than what is stated here. Also, of course, her kit can change, as that's how these betas go, so just because she is very good currently does not mean she will stay good until the end of the beta. I don't expect her to receive any more nerfs, but we'll see. In her current state, I would say she's a lot better off than Zani, because she does not need that limited 5-star to be in the top 3 argument, but she still has some potential problems that you'll have to work around. As for her 2 passive skills, the first one is when after using Carthethia's outro skill, the team's healing will increase by 20%, and if Rover is in the team, Rover's interruption resistance will increase. More healing is nice, and interruption res on Rover is also nice. It's nothing particularly crazy, but it's better than nothing. And then for every stack of wind erosion on the enemy, Carthethyia will gain 10% damage bonus, stacking up to 60%. So with this ability and the previous part of her kit that wants her to have 5 stacks for her second resonance liberation, you optimally want to have 6 stacks of Aero Erosion on the enemy to get this maximum damage increase for your Cartethyia. Now, just like Spectral Frazzle, wind erosion has a limit as well, which is 3 stacks. Now you might be wondering, well, that's not 6 stacks, I thought we needed 6. That's not even enough to reach 5. Well, that's when the GOAT Aero Rover comes into play. What Aero Rover's outro skill does is it grants a buff to the team for 30 seconds, and when hitting an enemy with this buff on your character, it will increase the maximum stacks of wind erosion the enemy can receive by 3 for 10 seconds. This is really important for Cartethyia, as like I said, she gets a lot of damage bonus from having more stacks of wind erosion on the enemy, and more stacks means it takes longer to go down to 0, which will just make your erosion uptime a lot better. So even if Aero Rover cannot apply wind erosion directly without the addition of Ciaccona or Phoebe on the team, they'll still be in pretty much every Cartethyia team, as this erosion stack increase is very important. Moving on to her outro skill, it gives a 17.5% damage amplify. This buff is given to teammates that attack enemies with status effects like wind erosion or spectral frazzle, and whatever new effects that come out in the future. It's nice that she has a buff that also doesn't actually get lost when swapping, and it applies to the whole team, making her a bit more flexible as a character since you can somewhat use her as a support. However, currently this buff really isn't that big, and it only currently works for the 2 spectral frazzle DPSs, aka Zani and Phoebe, as they're the only characters that can apply a status effect, but they don't want wind erosion whatsoever, so Cartethyia isn't really doing much besides the 17.5% damage amplify, when you could just use Rover or Shorekeeper or Verena that would just give a bigger buff. This may have more use in the future for new characters that apply status effects and also want Aero Erosion, but in that case, why not just play Ciaccona, as she also applies wind erosion, and her buffs to Aero DPSs are just a lot better than Carthethia's. I guess if you don't pull Ciaccona, she could instead be that support for a future character, so that's nice, but you could still use other options, and this outro really isn't that great. Now that's pretty much her entire kit. How does she function as a character? Like I said at the start of this video, she's pretty much just the normal attack focused DPS that has HP scaling and benefits from the wind erosion status effect being on the enemy, but she herself cannot deal wind erosion damage. The main source of damage will come from her resonance liberation that allows her to transform into an enhanced state, giving her a bunch more damage percent and just better scaling. The first character she'll likely be compared to is Zani, as they are somewhat similar. However, Cartethyia does have noticeable differences in the way she is able to be played. Firstly, she is able to apply the status effect she wants on her own a lot better than Zani can. Secondly, her teams are a lot more flexible, as currently Ciaccona is more of a quality of life character for her, and in terms of raw buffs, she's not that big of an increase over the other options. A Zani team without Phoebe and a Zani team with Phoebe is a pretty big difference, and I think the most important difference is, like I said earlier, she is still top of the meta even without her best in slot 5-star support character, unlike Zani, who's still good but not top 3 in teams without Phoebe. Now just because I'm pointing out Zani's downside, I'm not trying to say that Zani is terrible. In a team with Phoebe, in my opinion, Zani is the best DPS in the game, so if you do have the things to make Zani work, she is very good. However, Cartethyia having more options is a really big upside and can make her a better feeling character for some players. So what do I think about her? Well, I think her animations are really fucking cool. I think it's really sick how she can swap between forms and how they actually just let you freely walk around this flood release if you want to. I also love that they actually kept her as big as she normally is. It would have been pretty weird if you were just walking around normal size, so I think that's a cool bonus as well. I think her kit is a bit overcomplicated for no reason. There's way too much text when it really doesn't matter, but in terms of how she functions, she's pretty much Shizani if she was Wind Erosion instead of Spectrofrazzle. All in all, she's really fucking good. I think the biggest thing we'll have to wait and see on is how her rotations end up functioning in practicality without Ciaccona. I really hope my idea of swapping between forms to apply erosion and then swapping back to then attack more is possible and actually optimal, because that'd be a pretty fun way to play her, and I think it allows for a lot more depth in the combat. But yeah, she looks really good. I'm glad in terms of at least buffing, Ciaccona isn't that crazy like Phoebe was. If they change that, this is just completely void. That's another pretty big potential change if they decide to make Carthethia's damage in the flood release form actually Aero Erosion damage. Then Ciaccona's damage amp is going to actually matter, and it'll make the gap between teams with her and without her a lot larger, which can be a problem for the people who did not pull Ciaccona. But currently that's not how it is, and I hope it stays that way so we don't have a recreation of the Zani situation, even though in my opinion that situation was also kind of blown out of proportion as well, but it is what it is. Anyways, that's pretty much it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next one.